So he just cut us. He cut us in half. What I love about where John's taken us, and even your comments as we opened up today in today's lesson, is use the word guide, and John's used it before too. And as a leader, that's so much of what we ought to be. Not only guiding them professionally, but also personally. We believe in that, but also helping guide them to learn, to be developed, to facilitate conversations and situations. And so this is, again, like Mark said, if you did not listen to part one, I want to encourage you to do that, because there's some really good content in points 1 and 2 in part 1. Today in part 3, John jumps right in and he talks about, and this is so true for all of us. I know even internally as he was teaching this, and you and I were sitting here taking notes, I go, oh yeah, no, I want to be in a safe environment, especially coming through what we've experienced over the last couple of years. So many people want to be heard. They want to make sure they're seen. They want to be in a safe place for many reasons. But as a leader, we want to be able to create that around content, around what we're facilitating, around what they're learning, around what we're learning. And I've seen you do this many times. Leaders go first. And one of the first things you do when we're learning something new or you're teaching us something new is like, hey, let me tell you where I messed this up.
Yeah.
And this is what I learned from it. And you almost kind of just take our walls down. You go, man, okay, so we're going to leave. We're going to go after this inside the organization, personally or professionally. And it's okay if we mess up, because you went first and you lowered that walls for us. Talk a little bit about how you create that environment in our team as a leader of teaching, of communicating, facilitating things that are adding value to us, but giving us permission to experiment, to try, to fail. Talk a little bit about that from your leadership lens.
Yeah, every podcast, some of you may know this, you've picked up on it by now, we kind of put a standout statement before every podcast. And it's just kind of the overarching thesis of what we're trying to drive. And today's is great teachers don't teach, they inspire. And I think the biggest thing for me is when I am assessing a difficult conversation or a particularly challenging time in my leadership, or perhaps one of the greatest accomplishments I've ever had professionally, one of my desires is, with my passion, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but is to use inspiration to get others believing that they too can experience success, that they too can get through this difficult time, that they too have the ability to move in a direction that is positive in its nature. And I think going back, Chris, to you asking me, okay, so what are we talking about here when teachers take risk, when teachers create a safe environment? So how do you create the safe environment? How do you create a place to inspire, back to our thesis? And I am constantly assessing myself as a leader more on inspiration than I am on content. Now, I haven't forgotten, those of you that have been following John for years as I have not forgotten the difference between a motivational teacher and a motivational speaker.
That's right.
We know this. A motivational teacher takes something simple and makes it complicated, right? Sorry for all you teachers out there. A motivational speaker, actually takes things that are complicated and makes it simple.
That's good.
And so what you and I need to realize as leaders, and all of our podcast listeners, is we have a responsibility to create the environment for which we want to teach, or for which we want to take people on a journey with us. I was talking about this before as we just kind of put some prep thoughts together. I was reminded of a complete leadership colossal mess up that I had recently. I mean, just absolutely, it dotted the I on everything a leader could do to mess up. Now, I have to tell you in podcast land that Jake, our producer, and Jared, our content vice president here in the both of them are in the studio, and they keep cautioning me not to keep being vulnerable. They say I've been too vulnerable lately. They don't like vulnerability. They like polish and faking things out. And I'm just kidding. I'm giving them a hard time because they said we were talking about something else and they did that. But I'm getting ready to be vulnerable with you again. Okay, so Jake, Jared, shut your ears. Okay. I'm in this meeting. I've got brand new team members. In fact, the meeting, we're merging two companies. The meeting was literally half and half. Existing people that have worked with me for years And people that this was literally their first meeting ever with me. Okay, get the picture. I've got people that know me at the heart level. They have watched me stumble and fumble and mess up hundreds of times and come back and be authentic like I'm trying to be now. And then we have other people that the jury is out if this redheaded guy is going to even be worth listening to, much less following. In this meeting, I had an individual that I'm working with to develop their leadership acumen. There's a passion that they have to lead at this level and a realization that they've got a gap to close. So we're working on it, and I'm doing this, and I'm pulling no punches. Sometimes I go, hey, that was a really bad move, and then I move on, trusting the relational equity that we have, okay? This particular leader decided in the middle of a very important meeting to go off point with my agenda, just completely off point. No harm, no foul. That happens hundreds of times, Chris. You probably in that same meeting did it, but I'm not working with you the same level for the same reason.
Right.
In this moment, I realized that they had created a challenge for something that I had been working with them one-on-one, and I decided to highlight it in front of everybody, the infraction they made to leadership awareness. Now, was I right? Yes, the leadership awareness was not there. I was trying to take the meeting here. They went there, and they did it publicly. And I could have handled it 53 different ways. The way I chose to handle it was call them out in front of everybody. Their people, new people. This is a very prominent person that was a champion for me in this room that I completely embarrassed. Now, let's go back to what John says. We never learn from that which embarrasses us. Number one, I devalued another human being.
That's right.
Let's just call a party foul there against our very values. Number two, if my mental thought at that moment was to teach them how off that was, I can never teach somebody from a place of embarrassment. And as a leader, we've got to always make sure that there are some lessons that need to be learned one-on-one, and very few lessons that need to be learned by one in front of many.
That's good.
Because it creates an embarrassing situation, and no lesson is transferred in an embarrassing situation.
Yeah, I am smiling not because the situation was not serious, because it is. I'm smiling because, man, I've found myself there before. And the way that we can immediately disconnect with our people, John talks about connecting with our people to be able to teach them, to facilitate content, is to embarrass them. You want to disconnect with someone on your team, then go ahead and embarrass them.
That's exactly right.
And I'll tell you this, I have a tendency at times, and Joel Manby kind of hits this, one of our incredible thought leaders talks about it a lot. Never, ever, ever is there a reason to make a joke in a meeting, in a group setting, at someone else's expense, even if you're not making a point, because what does that do? That draws attention to them and embarrasses them. And, so, man, that's such a good point when you were facilitating content, you were teaching, you were opening up the room for a certain situation, and it happened. But what I love about it that you didn't share was immediately after the meeting.
I apologize.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's okay, right? Like that you did that. That is awesome to be able to go first, just like I talked about. So you made that mistake. One of the things that I think about is because we've been around facilitation of content for so long, is that there are tips, there are techniques, there are different personalities that are going to be in a room. You knew his personality, and it didn't surprise you. Matter of fact, you just reacted.
I did.
You weren't surprised by it, but you reacted. And so one of the things that we've done in helping leaders with content, but more importantly is to facilitate it, is to make sure you're aware of what are the competencies to facilitate a great meeting, great content. What are some of the tips to stay away from? What are some of the techniques to open up the room? All those things. We've just been blessed to be around for so many years of content, and seeing John do it and our facilitators